Hello, my name is Scott Leopold with Cooperative Strategies, and I will be taking you through the boundary change process along with a series of options for the City Schools of Decatur. This presentation is about 30 minutes and is identical to the presentation that will be given at Decatur High School on January 17th from 6:30 to 8:30. At the end of this video, there will be a survey link for you to provide feedback. All maps and tables from this presentation are posted on the project website. If you cannot see something clearly in this video, please utilize those resources as well. Also, feel free to pause at any time to get a better look at any of the maps or data. This has been a collaborative process with lots of input from district staff and community volunteers. I would like to recognize some key personnel that helped us along the way. Dr. David Duty is the superintendent of the City Schools of Decatur and has been a great resource for providing guidance along the way relative to the GO bond process and the overall vision of the school district. Again, I am Scott Leopold with Cooperative Strategies. Our firm was contracted to facilitate this process and also provide national experience and best practices. Karen Daniel Hamburg, also with Cooperative Strategies, has helped to facilitate the process. Courtney Burnett is the Director of Community and Government Relations for the district, and she has also been integral in the process by providing information to the public, answering any questions that anybody has had throughout the process. Lastly, we have the steering committee. This has been a great group of parent volunteers and other community members and even some district staff that has really provided great local insight throughout the process. As we continue on, you will see the impact of the committee in this process. I want to start off by addressing some misconceptions that may be out there and hopefully relieve any anxiety that you may have building up to this presentation. First and foremost, no decisions have been made. Again, this is a collaborative process with community involvement. So the purpose of this engagement is to collect your feedback. The options that you will see in this presentation are intended to generate conversation and feedback. This is not a vote where you need to decide which one of these options is going to be recommended. The options that we're presenting will likely not be 100% of any recommendation because they'll likely be adjusted based on your feedback. In 12 years of facilitating these types of processes, I do not recall an option going through the community feedback process without any changes or adjustment before it turns into a recommendation. At the end of this presentation, there will be a link to an online survey so that you can give us your feedback. If you don't like any of the options, tell us. If there's a change that you'd like to see the committee consider, tell us. This is truly an open and transparent process. After your feedback is collected, the committee will evaluate and develop recommendations for the board to consider. Moving on to the overall process, we started back in September reviewing the enrollment data as students came to school. We also looked at the capacity and the GO bond process. When we began our work with the committee, we talked about best practices for boundary planning and then began to develop options. Now we are here sharing the options with the community for feedback. That feedback will be evaluated by the committee and then recommendations will be shared with the school board for discussion. As far as overall objectives go for this process, there are two. Number one, we're opening a new facility on Talley Street that will serve grades 3 through 5 beginning in the 2019-20 school year. By doing this, we'll move third grade out of the lower elementaries, reducing enrollment and the reliance on modular classrooms. That leads us to number two. Based on current boundaries, after the third grade moves out of the lowers, the overall utilization will reduce, but there's still going to be some imbalance. Some of the schools would be utilized at less than 70% of their capacity, and some would still be over capacity, even with third grade being removed. As you are reflecting on the objectives as we present the options, also consider the following. There are not going to be any changes implemented for next school year. Without the additional capacity at Talley Street, we cannot begin to implement any change. As you look at the numbers, you will see utilization figures. This is enrollment versus the capacity of a building. You will notice that the upper elementary schools will be over 100% utilized on average in every option. This is due to the feedback received from both the community and the board during the general obligation bond process, or GO bond. We don't want to overbuild. That message was heard loud and clear. And so the overall elementary utilization will be 95%. Opening Talley Street will be the end of this GO bond process, but future facility planning will be ongoing. One of the goals of that process was to reduce the reliance on modular classrooms. So all the figures that you will see do not include modulars. So if you see a facility that is over 100% utilized, that assumes that there are no students in any of the modulars on that site. So does this mean that when Talley Street opens, all of the modular classrooms have to go away? Not necessarily. Modular classrooms are a consequence of a growing school district, And again, our overall goal is to reduce the reliance on them, but we need to remember that we do not want to overbuild based on that projected enrollment. And modular classrooms are an effective way to educate students until permanent capacity can be constructed for the students that are actually in the system. Here's a little more detail on some of the background data that you'll see throughout the presentation. State standard capacity counts were used, and all figures are based on permanent capacity of the facilities and do not include any modular classroom space. There are currently 22 modular classrooms at all of the elementary sites, and that almost feels like an extra school, and so shouldn't be a surprise that we're opening a new school at Talley Street. All the enrollment figures are based on current enrollment for this year, and then the most current projections for future years. Again, the current grade configuration will remain in place for next year, and then when Talley Street opens in 2019-20, we will transition to the K2-3-5 configuration. As I alluded to before, we relied heavily on a steering committee to help us with local, cultural, and institutional knowledge throughout this process. To assemble the committee, there was an application process in which 29 committee members applied, and all were invited to participate. We additionally invited some other members to ensure balance of representation at all schools, and this includes a representative from every elementary school leadership team. By participating on the committee, all the members agreed to adhere to the roles and responsibilities. They were to be objective and consider the needs of all students in the district, utilize boundary planning criteria to help guide participation and decision making, attend all attendance boundary committee meetings, and share information with their neighbors to help get the word out about the process, especially this community meeting that is ongoing right now. Here is our overall project timeline. The committee has had 3 meetings, and after this engagement, if the committee determines that we need to have additional meetings to discuss the recommendations, the final board meeting may move. Again, just to reiterate, if we need more time in this process to consider your feedback, we can take it. In order to effectively frame the development of options, we shared some national best practices with the committee. These include promoting reasonable balancing of enrollment among all schools to avoid over or underutilization, consider the unique needs of student population at a given campus, which may or may not be reflected in the data alone. We also want to minimize the use of modular classrooms that are a result of a facility operating over capacity. We want to consider the fiscal impact, minimizing future capital and operational budget costs. We want to attempt to maintain diverse student populations. We want to utilize transportation resources effectively. We want to consider anticipated construction and residential growth within the community. The committee also felt that walkability and neighborhood cohesion was very important, and you'll see that prominently in the benefits and challenges for each option. These were utilized as general guidelines for the development of options, and you will see that there are trade-offs between these items as we work through the options. This is an example of one of the tools that the committee had at their disposal. With the help of the committee, we divided the district up into about 45 or 50 different puzzle pieces or planning units. We could then move these puzzle pieces around in the GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, and we could instantaneously see what the impact of moving one area from one school to another is. It would tell us just instantaneously how many students we impacted, what the resulting utilization is, how it impacts the projected enrollment. It would also give us feeder pattern information, which we'll go into in a lot more detail in the next couple slides when we start talking about the options. Using these tools just made it very effective and efficient in the options development process to kind of crank out a lot of options very quickly so that the committee could spend their time discussing those options. Before we go into the options, let me emphasize a few things. There is no preferred option. The order in which the options are presented does not indicate any priority ranking or favor of the options by the committee. These options are intended for feedback and discussion. We will have a survey link at the end of this presentation for you to provide that feedback to the committee that they will review as recommendations are developed. Lastly, it is very unlikely that any one of these options will be 100% of any recommendation, as the committee will likely make adjustments based on your feedback. So as we get into the actual options, I want to first focus on the current boundaries so that you can understand how all of these option sheets will work. The map on the left illustrates the current lower elementary school boundaries. The Glenwood area is shaded in purple, Claremont in yellow, Westchester in red, Oakhurst in blue, Winona Park in green. The table on the right shows the current capacity, enrollment, and utilization at each of the schools. The utilization table is shaded to correspond to different thresholds of utilization. If a facility is under 85%, it is in blue. If it's utilized between 85 and 95%, it's in green. Between 95 and 115%, it's going to be in that yellow gold color. If it's over 115%, it's going to be in red. Again, the capacity does not include any modular classroom spaces. So when we show utilization ranges in that gold or red color, modulars may still be needed. You'll notice a drop in utilization between the 18-19 school year and the 19-20 school year. We wanted to illustrate what would happen with the current boundaries if we just move third grade out of the lower schools. And you can see that across the board, we drop in utilization, and then we see a big jump in utilization at FAVE from 145% to 231%. And this illustrates our need for the Talley Street building. Lastly, the feeder pattern chart on the bottom right of the slide illustrates the progression of schools. And so this is very simple for the current configuration because all 5 of the lower elementary schools feed into FAVE. And so you'll see that 100% denoted at each of the schools. I did want to just focus on some of the inherent challenges that we faced throughout this process. One of them was that we had excess capacity at the lower elementary level, and it's all north of the train tracks, while all of the overutilized schools are south of the train tracks. Due to the difficulty of crossing the train tracks, the current boundaries align with the tracks. So some of the options that you'll see are going to assign areas south of the train tracks to the schools in the north to balance that utilization at the lower levels. This is option 1. The map on the left illustrates the moves required at the lower elementary level, and they are quite extensive. You'll see all the data that pertains to this option on the next slide. The crosshatched areas show the change areas that would move schools. And so just as an example, let's look at the area that's crosshatched in red on top of the yellow. And so the yellow corresponds to Claremont, and then the red corresponds to the receiving school in this case, which would be Westchester. Looking at the other changes, we have areas that move from Westchester and Claremont into Glenwood. We've got some areas that move from Oakhurst into Winona Park. We've got some areas that move from Winona Park into Oakhurst. This may seem a little strange or counterintuitive, but keep in mind that this is done to balance enrollment, and the change areas that you see are different sizes. We have the area that's right in and around Talley Street moving from Winona Park up into Glenwood. And lastly, we have a large area moving out of Glenwood into Claremont. The map on the right shows the boundaries for the upper elementary schools using thick blue lines, and there's a darker transparency shade over the lowers so that you can still see those boundaries and how they align. But what's important about this particular option is that everything aligns perfectly at the boundary level. And so in this particular option, Westchester, Claremont, and Glenwood would all feed 100% into Talley Street, with Winona Park and Oakhurst feeding 100% into FAVE. And we'll show that on the next page as we go through the data. Here's the data sheet for option 1. As you can see on the top left, we have smaller versions of the map from the previous slide so that you can still see them for reference. Looking at the utilization and the results out of this one, you can see that we've got some pretty good balance at the lower elementaries. We're moving third grade out in 2019-20, and so that's the overall drop that we see from 120% down to 92%. But looking at the individual school level, Claremont would go from 93% to 84%, Glenwood from 112 to 88, Oakhurst goes down from 129 to 99%, Westchester goes from 122% to 88, Winona Park goes from 147 all the way down to 99% utilized. Looking at the upper schools, we do have a little bit of imbalance here. We have FAVE at 125%, which is down from 145%, but it's still not close to that 108% overall average. We have Talley Street at 94%. Looking at kind of the strengths and challenges that we have for this option, again, we don't have any feeder splits. And so in this scenario, Claremont, Glenwood, and Westchester would all feed 100% into Talley Street. Oakhurst and Winona Park would feed 100% into FAVE. We have good balance at the lower elementary level. The majority of students would attend their geographically closest school at the upper elementary level. And so we do have those adjustments that we made. We have that area that's south of the railroad tracks that we would move from Winona Park into Glenwood to then align with that Tally Street zone, which keeps Tally within its own zone, and you'll see a little piece of that and some other options moving forward. Some of the challenges that we faced in this option, as we mentioned before, this moves 24% of all the students at the lower elementary level, and so it's a lot of students that are impacted by this. The utilization is imbalanced at that upper level. We have 125% at Fave, while we have 94% at Tally. And there's some concerns about walkability for some families, just because of the extent of the changes that we would have at the lower elementary levels. Overall, this is an option that is focused on balancing utilization at the lower elementaries and aligning those feeder patterns, trading off that high number of students impacted and that balance that we were looking for at the upper elementary schools. This is option 2. As you can see right off the bat, that our changes in this at the lower level are much less extensive than we had in option 1, but as you'll learn on the next slide, there's going to be some trade-offs. Looking at the change areas, we have one area that's going to move from Westchester into Claremont, and then we have 2 areas that are going to move north out of Winona Park across the train tracks into Glenwood. Looking at the uppers, you can see we do have some splits. We have a portion of Westchester that will feed into Tally Street, and we have a portion of Claremont that will feed into Tally Street as well, with other portions feeding into Fave. And so we'll have 100% of Oakhurst feeding into Fave, 100% of Winona Park, and 100% of Glenwood feeding into Tally Street. Looking at the data for option 2, you'll see the layout is identical to what we had for option 1. So you'll see the small maps on the top left that show the changes for both the lowers and the uppers. And then you'll see the feeder pattern diagram, benefits and challenges. I'm going to start by going through the data table at the bottom. As you can see, looking at the utilization, Claremont goes from 93% to 79%. Glenwood goes from 112% to 99%. Oakhurst goes from 129 down to 105%. Westchester goes from 122 to 83%, and Winona Park goes from 147 to 90%. Keep in mind overall that this does include the grade configuration change, and so the overall utilization at the lower schools is going to go from 120% to 92%. We do have some better balance at the upper schools here. We have 111% at Fave and 106% at Tally Street. But kind of as we mentioned before, that balance comes at a cost. And in this case, that cost is the feeder alignment. And so as we look at the feeder chart, it's a little different than we had in option 1. We have 66% of Claremont would feed into Tally Street and 34% would feed into Fave. Again, Glenwood and Winona Park would both feed 100% into Tally Street. Westchester would split 32% to Tally Street and 68% to Fave. Looking at the benefits and challenges for this option, we only impact about 5% of the lower students at the elementaries. The utilization is pretty well balanced at the upper levels, and we do maintain some good walkability. Challenges that we have, of course, we have those feeder splits. 34% and a 66% split, and a 32% and a 68% split. We do have some students that are going to be crossing the train tracks to attend Glenwood, but remember, that's where our capacity is. Our capacity is north of the train tracks, and our overutilization is south of the train tracks. Claremont is projected to be underutilized, while Oakhurst and Glenwood are projected to be overutilized. Overall, this is an option that's focused on balancing utilization at the upper elementaries. It does a moderate job at balancing the utilization at the lowers. We're at 80% at Claremont. We're at 102% at Glenwood and 108% at Oakhurst in year 2, which would be the 2021 school year. We do show in the table on the right just the overall seat delta. And so you can see that 105% at Oakhurst in the 1920 school year is 21 students over capacity. And so that just wants to show kind of the order of magnitude of what that overutilization really is at the building level. Here's option 3. This one impacts even less students at the lower level than options 1 and 2. Looking at the changes, we have the area that's right in and around Talley Street moving north into Glenwood, and then we have a small portion moving out of Winona Park into Oakhurst. Looking at the uppers in this particular scenario, everything feeds pretty cleanly with the exception of Winona Park. It would be the only school that would split. Claremont and Glenwood would feed 100% into Talley Street. Westchester and Oakhurst would feed 100% into Fave, and again we would have that split at Winona Park between Fave and Talley Street. Here's our data associated with option 3. Again, we'll have the maps on the top left, the feeder chart, the benefits and challenges. Looking at the data, Claremont's going to go from 93% to 69%, Glenwood from 112 to 89%, Oakhurst from 129 down to 114%, Westchester from 122 to 94, and Winona Park, which is currently the most overutilized lower elementary school, would go from 147 down to 87%. The uppers are going to be pretty well balanced. We're 101% at Fave, Talley Street's 114. Not as well balanced as option 2, but better than option 1. Looking at the feeder pattern chart with this, you can see we've got 100% feeders from Claremont into Talley Street and Glenwood into Talley Street. Oakhurst and Westchester would both feed 100% into Fave, and then we have that split with 75% or 76% of Winona Park going to Talley Street and 24% going to Fave. Looking at the benefits and challenges, benefits are this moves only 3% of students at the lower level. It maintains walkability for most families. Maximizes walkability at the upper elementary level. Looking at our challenges, again, that feeder split 24% and 76% at Winona Park. Claremont is underutilized while Oakhurst is overutilized. The utilization is imbalanced a little bit at the upper elementary level. So overall, what this option did is it focused on that minimal impact at the lower level and tried to improve on option 2 by reducing those feeder splits. And so we only have that one school that splits in this particular option. Also, just looking at the seat delta on the chart, you'll see that overutilization at Oakhurst would be 60 students over capacity. And so again, remember that these numbers do not include any capacity from any modular classrooms that we have on those sites. So this is option 4A. What this scenario does is this leaves the lower boundaries completely alone. No changes would occur at the lower elementary schools in this particular scenario. Looking at the upper boundaries, we would have a split at Claremont between Fave and Talley Street. Westchester and Oakhurst would both feed 100% into Fave. Winona Park and Glenwood would feed 100% into Talley Street. Here's the data for option 4A. Again, we have our maps on the top left, feeder pattern chart, benefits and challenges, and now I'm going to go through the data. And so this is going to be exactly for the lowers like we showed on a couple slides previous where we showed the current boundaries, because we don't have any changes at the lower elementaries. And so this is going to be what the boundaries would look like as they are today, only the utilizations are different because we're pulling third grade out. And so Claremont, just by pulling third grade out, is going to go from 93% to 69%. Glenwood from 112% to 85%. Oakhurst from 129 to 105%. Westchester from 122 to 94%. Winona Park from 147% to 104%. So looking at our seat deltas at the lowers, that 105% at Oakhurst is really 21 students, and the 104% at Winona Park is 12 students. And so that's just to kind of give you an order of magnitude of what that overutilization means. And then also do bear in mind that we do not have any capacity for the modular classrooms in the formulas. And so there would be room for those students in those modulars that are on those sites. Looking at the upper elementary schools, we have Fave would go from 145% to 111%, and Talley Street would open 105%. So that's a pretty good balance between those two schools. Looking at the feeder patterns, again, we would have one school that splits, and that would be Claremont. It's pretty close to a 50-50 split, with 55% of the students feeding onto Talley Street and 45% of the students going to Fave. Glenwood and Winona Park would each feed 100% into Tally Street. Oakhurst and Westchester would each feed 100% into Fave. So looking at the benefits and challenges for this option, we don't impact any students at a lower level. Walkability is maintained at the lower level at its current configuration, and our upper elementary utilizations are pretty well balanced. Challenges that we have are we have that 45-55% split at Claremont. We do have some underutilization at Claremont, while again Oakhurst and Winona Park are overutilized. Some students that are previously able to walk to Fave may need to be bused to Tally Street. And then that would be it for this one. This is option 4B. We opted to keep this 4A and 4B because the lower configuration is the same. The only difference is that we have between option 4A and 4B is what we do with the boundaries for the upper schools. What 4B does is 4B splits the district north and south at the train tracks and aligns perfectly with the existing boundaries. And so 4A is that east and west split, and 4B is going to be that north and south split. So here is the data sheet for option 4B. Again, we've got our maps, our feeder chart, our benefits and challenges. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the utilization changes for the lowers because they're identical to option 4A. Looking at the uppers is where they're a little different. We do have a little bit of imbalance between Fave and Tally Street. We're at 113% utilized at Fave and 104% at Tally Street, which is a little bit imbalanced. But the trade-off for this is because of that imbalance, we do have those perfect feeder patterns. And so Claremont, Glenwood, and Westchester would all feed 100% into Tally Street, and Oakhurst and Winona Park would feed 100% into Fave. Looking at our benefits and challenges, we don't have any feeder splits in this scenario. We don't have any moves at the elementary level as well, or at the lower elementary, and our walkability is maintained. Looking at the challenges, we have a little bit of imbalance at the upper elementary schools. We do have that underutilization at Claremont, while Oakhurst and Winona Park are overutilized. And we have some students that are right in and around Tally Street that would attend Fave. And so in this particular model or option, Tally Street would be located outside of its attendance area. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for taking the time to view this. It's a very important process. Please utilize the survey link below to share your feedback. If there's something particular that you don't like about one option that you'd like to maybe see changed or tweaked, let us know in that survey. The committee will absolutely consider your considerations and comments as they develop recommendations, and the final recommendations will be presented to the school board. Again, the survey link is below, and it will be active until January 31st. Thank you.